Recently, a viewer shared with me a major frustration she has been experiencing with how certain Christians communicate, specifically regarding the kind looking but deeply arrogant attitude they show when interacting with non Christians. If you spend any time on social media, you know the exact phrases she was talking about. It's a style of acting superior under the pretension of being helpful. They open their statements with lines like, "Sorry to break it to you," or "I hate to burst your bubble, but." Sometimes it wears an even softer, more gentle smile. They will use the warm, patient language of a parent speaking to a toddler, saying, "It's completely natural to have questions at your stage." Or they will look at you with performance level empathy and say, "May God reveal His love to you in a way you can understand." You see it all the time in comment sections or family group chats. Non Christians may be enjoying their lives, celebrating a secular festival, or just expressing a progressive viewpoint, and Christians will immediately drop a status that reads, "I hate to burst your bubble, but our worldly happiness is temporary. Real peace only comes when you surrender your life to Christ and accept the truth." On the surface, these phrases are framed as bold, uncomfortable truths or gentle blessings delivered by a courageous, loving believer who is just doing the world a painful favor. But today, I want to pull back the curtain on this specific conversational style, because those words are not actually coming from a place of kindness or genuine concern. In fact, it's completely the opposite. That attitude is a desperate psychological coping mechanism. It is a verbal weapon thrown by an exclusive dogmatist who is experiencing a profound existential panic. Today, we are going to decode the exact psychological architecture of the imaginary pedestal, the cultural contrast. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the structural source code of the belief systems themselves. This specific brand of conversational arrogance, this need to look down on and lecture the outsider, is incredibly prevalent among exclusive dogmatic worldviews that claim an absolute monopoly on salvation. You see it constantly in mainstream Christian and Islamic apologetics. Yet, it is noticeably absent in pluralistic cultures such as Hinduism. Why? Because pluralistic frameworks do not rely on an us versus them binary. They don't teach that holding a specific theological passport makes you intrinsically superior to your neighbor. But in an exclusive dogma, the believer is handed a heavy psychological burden. Their theology insists that they are the spiritual elite. They are the chosen, the saved, the enlightened. Everyone outside their bubble is spiritually bankrupt, lost, and fundamentally broken. And that is where their theology collides headfirst with reality. The reality crash. The psychological conflict occurs at the everyday observational level. The exclusive believer steps out into the real world and they look around. They see secular individuals, Hindus, agnostics, atheists, and non-believers who are thriving. Not only are these non-Christians functioning perfectly, but they are often sharper intellectually, highly ethical, emotionally grounded, and deeply successful. This creates an intense internal crisis, cognitive dissonance. The Christian's theology says, "You are superior to the non-Christians," but his eyes say, "You are not any better than the non-Christians." Now the Christian cannot go to the non-Christian and say, "I am better than you" in plain words, because reality would instantly laugh them out of the room. Their arguments cannot hold weight under rational scrutiny. So how does that inner pride and status anxiety escape? It compresses into these underhanded, insulting, and superior sounding phrases. When they say, "Sorry to break it to you," or "God still loves you," or dismiss your research as a mere stage, they are trying to artificially manufacture a gap that doesn't exist in real life. It's a desperate attempt to claw back a pedestal and project an illusion of dominance over people who are objectively their equals or superiors. This is not a theory. It is a universal law of dogmatic psychology that bridges every social and economic class. Years ago, when I was still a Christian, I met a zealous Muslim man while traveling. In terms of formal education and profession, he happened to be at a lower level. When he learned I was a Christian, he immediately launched into standard Islamic apologetic scripts to prove me wrong. but I successfully dismantled his points. When we finally arrived at our destination, completely cornered intellectually, he made a final defensive remark to protect his pride. He said to me, "You may be more educated than me and you may be earning more than me, but none of your qualifications or career success is going to matter on the day of judgment." He genuinely believed he won the argument with that final remark. He realized he couldn't beat me on the actual playing field of logic or real world achievement. So, he invented an imaginary cosmic pedestal where he could remain on top and view me as beneath his feet. Now, a dogmatic Christian watching this would nod along and say, "Exactly, that's the classic arrogant Islamic mindset." But Christians are not any different. Even professional world-class Christian apologists use the exact same cheap escape hatch. Years ago, I watched the famous debate between Christian apologist Frank Turek and the legendary secular giant Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens, with his towering intellect, historical knowledge, and devastating wit, completely outclassed Frank Turek. The intellectual defeat was total. But do you know how Frank Turek chose to end his final closing speech? He looked at Christopher Hitchens and said, "While Christopher's attitude may be there is no God and I hate him, God's attitude is there is a Christopher Hitchens and I love him. In fact, I died for him." I want to tell you what happens inside a believer's mind when that line is dropped, because I lived it. When I watched that debate years ago as a Christian, my inner intellect knew we had lost against Christopher Hitchens. I could feel the factual defeat. But the moment Frank Turek said those words, an immense rush of tribal relief washed over me. I remember thinking, "We won. This is all that matters." Turek pinned him. Look at the sheer psychological architecture of what Frank Turek did there. Because he could not match Christopher Hitchens' arguments on a logical level, he shifted the focus entirely away from the facts. He tried to reduce Hitchens' towering intellect down to a mere personal grievance and then weaponized the crucifixion to lecture him. He essentially said, "You may have out-argued me, Christopher, but I speak for the God who died for you. Therefore, I am still on top and you are beneath my feet." Whether it is the everyday Muslim trying to bridge a class gap, a world-class apologist on a global stage, or your Christian colleague posting an arrogant status update on WhatsApp, the software is identical. These kind-looking but patronizing phrases, "Sorry to break it to you, it's just a stage, God loves you anyway," are not expressions of spiritual strength. They are spiritual narcotics. They are used to numb the agonizing pain of intellectual defeat. The next time someone hits you with that specific brand of religious condescension, do not let it anger you. Recognize it for what it truly is, an admission of defeat. They are not really on a high place. They are desperately trying to build an imaginary pedestal because reality just knocked them down.